stop. I see we're about to go into the live stream.
That's okay. I just wanted to start it.
You got another 30 seconds, Scott.
Okay. So since Frank is coming back, next week to tell a big part of his story, this week we could just do, I guess, a preview and focus on the VE Day aspect of things. But whatever you think is best.
Meaning less on the concentration camps.
Yeah.
Tonight.
That's okay. I just wanted to start it.
You got another 30 seconds. Okay, Scott.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe,
Joe,
get some echo. Hold on a sec.
Since Frank is coming back, next week to tell a big part of his story, this week we could just do, I guess, a preview and focus on the VE Day aspect of things. But whatever you think is
okay.
best.
I stopped the echo.
that was weird, Sean.
Can you guys hear me? Oh no.
Yeah, I can hear you.
What happened?
It sort of replayed something Scott had said 10 seconds ago.
I'm sharing my sound to, sorry everyone, sharing my sound to for the live stream for the beginning of the show for music. And whenever I started the live stream, it was playing the live stream off YouTube. So it was feeding a loop. I'll go ahead and start the music though, and we'll let everybody in, all right?
We're ready.
Let's do it. Good evening. Good everyone. Welcome to Veterans Breakfast Club, Greatest Generation Live. This is Thursday, May 8th. I am Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the VBC. It's great to see you all this evening. It's great to be back on for Thursday night. And we have some very special guests on World War II veterans on with us this evening that Glenn Flickinger and Scott Masters will be interviewing. Both of you. Glenn, how are you?
Excellent. Thank you very much. What a beautiful day in Pittsburgh, huh? Sun.
Absolutely. It was
Light
wonderful.
yellow thing in the sky is like, what is that? Okay, it's the sun. Great day, and we're really pleased tonight to have some more World War II veterans with us, which we'll be introducing in a minute. This is Greatest Generation Live. Most of you know it, but for those who may not, every Thursday night or most Thursday nights, it's our program about everything World War II. And tonight, since it is May 8th, which is VE Day, we'll talk about May 7th versus May 8th in a little bit here. We thought we would celebrate VE Day with as many veterans as we could find and get their memories of that day. And a little bit of their stories leading up to that time and what happened to them afterwards as well. So we have a few veterans, and we have Scott Masters. Scott, such a pleasure to have you as a co-host tonight.
Thank you very much. I look forward to being your Ed McMahon.
without the alcohol, I hope.
Well, I'm not gonna. Nobody can see what's going on over here.
It's Canada, they've got some great whiskey up there, and beer.
The Maple Leafs won last night, so we're in a good mood. And Glenn, I just noticed that George Rubin came in the room.
Oh, great. Could you unmute George Rubin for us, Sean?
Sure. Let me find him. I'm in a different view. You're co-host, so if you see him, go ahead and ask him to unmute.
Yep. Let me do the same. Thank you, Scott, for looking out for George. Not found them yet.
We will get him. We will find him.
Okay. I'm going to let you find him.
Okay. Yeah, you continue.
Okay. I'm gonna start with Scott.
There's George.
Okay. George is on.
Yep. I just unmuted or asked you to unmute, George. Oh. Go ahead, Glenn, while we get George up. There we go. George, go ahead.
Hi, George. Thank you for joining us.
I'm pleased to be with you guys. Yes.
Thank you. I know your schedule was pretty tight and we weren't sure, so really nice of you to come on. Thank you. We're going to introduce you to these other veterans in a minute. We have at least 4, I believe, But Scott, you're such a great friend of the Veterans Breakfast Club. Has been ever since I've been a part of the Veterans Breakfast Club, and you've been on so many programs. Give us a couple of minutes about what you do, your oral history project, where you are in Toronto, the school, Crestwood, etc. Just so the audience appreciates what you do, which is an awful lot for veterans.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Glenn. And I also just noticed that Wing Yoke Lai is in the room under the name Yoke Wing, Sean. He's also a World War II veteran who we previously have spoken to. But as most of you guys know, I'm a high school teacher up here in Toronto, and I have been teaching since 1991. And just this year, the only teacher in the school who was older than me decided to retire, which means I am now the oldest teacher in the school. Not sure how I feel about that, but there it is. And about 20 years ago or so, I started this program of really actively having veterans come into the school to share their stories. I thought it would be an interesting thing for the students to hear. I think everybody in this room grew up with parents or grandparents who were in the war in one way or another. And we all grew up having those conversations. In my case, it was with my grandfathers, and it was just, such a big part of my teenage years. And I thought that this generation of students should have the opportunity to do the same thing. So we started doing interviews with veterans, bringing them into the school, visiting in their homes or whatever. Just the other day, we did a big gathering at the school in concert with Veteran Affairs Canada. It was the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Netherlands this week, which was a really big part of Canada's World War II effort. So if it's okay, Glenn, I'll show that picture. I think people will
Yeah.
like to see it. We had
Please.
a pretty significant number of veterans come to the school. Let me bring the picture up there. So this is me and my colleague Jason, and all of these veterans were at the school the other day sharing their stories and talking to students. You guys here have all met Jack Bokey here before, and this guy Percy Smith was in the Merchant Navy. He appeared on a program a couple of years ago as well. But it was just an amazing day. We had them there for a couple of hours. The students were right in there. It was really absolutely fantastic. And, it's exactly what I envisioned when we started doing this a real long time ago. And the kids love it. I mean, for the vast majority of them, they don't get to talk to centenarians in their everyday lives. So it was just a really cool thing to do. And it's something I enjoy an awful lot.
Well, we congratulate you for such a tremendous effort, and pointing it at this very young generation is absolutely the key thing to do. I mean, most of us on this call, we get it and don't need to be prompted, but the younger generation, get them to appreciate what these men and women did for us is huge. So thanks.
Yeah, my pleasure. And it's been great connecting with you guys. Um, I got connected to the VBC during the pandemic just because I was looking for something to do with my time. And, it ended up being a real nice fit 5 years later or however long ago it was.
Great. So listen, let's get started. We weren't sure just how many veterans we were going to have tonight, so we kept preparing other little sidebars just in case we only had two, but I think we have five, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so I don't think we need to go into too many sidebars. But since I get to put this program together, I'm going to do one for everybody, okay? And it only take 2 minutes, but it's one of my favorite generals of World War II, indeed of one of our favorite presidents. And let me just share the screen with you here because I just have a little bitty thing to share with you and tell you this story, which some of you may be aware of, okay? So the story is General Eisenhower and his announcement on the on VE Day. So VE Day is variously stated as May 7th or May 8th. May 7th was the date that the Germans actually came to Reims and signed the document at like 2 o'clock in the morning. But the agreement was that the announcement would be delayed until May the 8th. So they come, they signed the document. Eisenhower is not in the room. He refused to meet or shake hands with any of the Germans. They weren't sure they were going to sign. There had been some negotiations a day or two leading up to it about just what was going to be the nature of the surrender, that sort of thing. And he let this man right in the middle there, his chief of staff, Beadle Smith, who's another fascinating character, run the meeting and take care of the signing. So the story I want to relate, after the signing, all the generals, all the Allied generals, of course, were all excited. Hey, we did it. It's over. We won the war in Europe. We need to announce this. We need to send the communication back to Allied High Command. And the story is that several of them drafted statements for Eisenhower, and Eisenhower rejected them all, as if they were trying to come up with something profound, another mini Gettysburg Address or a mini Magna Carta or whatever, right? And Eisenhower rejected them all, and this is what he had to say. A little hard for you to read, so I have another slide. And this is what he sent to Allied High Command. The mission of this Allied force was fulfilled at 0241 local time, May 7th, 1945. And that was it, which to me is just a great reflection of the man, this huge effort he and the other top brass put into this to direct all these young men that are on our and women that are on our program tonight. And that's all he had to say. Sort of not just barely a full sentence. And again, I just appreciate the man, appreciate what he had to say. So that's all I wanted to get out. Now I have that off my chest. Thank you. Let us go through the names of the veterans that we have on the program. Scott, you want to start with oops, I see Scott's on the phone. So
Scott is working with one of our other World War II vets, Hilbert, to see if we can get him on. So go ahead, Glenn.
Okay, so we'll start with the two veterans that the VBC was able to bring into this conversation. One is Joe Peterburs. Joe, let's make sure he's unmuted.
Yes, yep. I'm here, ready to go.
Okay, Joe. Thank you for being on, Joe. We haven't seen you in a while. You've turned 100 since we last spoke with you.
That's correct. Last November.
And you're still flying P-51s. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I've had a couple of rides in P-51. And two of them I was able to have, they had full controls in the back, so I was able to do a few little things like barrel rolls and high-speed runs over an abandoned airfield and stuff like that. So it was a lot of fun. Hardest part was getting into the aircraft.
It's amazing, Joe. I'm still afraid of roller coasters. So, to me, it's a miracle. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Joe, meet another veteran. I don't think you've met him before, and that's George Rubin. George, please say hello.
Hello, it's good to be with you guys. It's interesting. I turned 100 yesterday. May 7th was my birthday.
Very nice.
Thank you. And World War II veteran, flew on bomber, 18 missions, was shot down, was a POW in Germany. And a very interesting story when you talk about May 7th. We were liberated about the 1st of May by General Patton's Third Army. We were in a camp called Moosburg, which was Stalag 7A south of Munich. And they flew us out of an airfield at Landshut, and they flew us to Reims, France. And here it is, May 8th at Reims, and everybody is applauding, and there's parades and everybody, and we thought it was for us, and found out, no, it's the end of the war, fellas. You just happen to be a sidebar, that's all. But it's good to be with you.
Yeah, thank you for that story. We might ask you to repeat it and embellish it a little bit. You and Joe have something in common, in that we were both shot down. near the end of the war. Joe was shot down. What date was that, Joe? Remind me.
10th
Shot
of
down
April.
February of 45
Right.
on
I
our
was
18th mission to Munich and didn't make it back. Yeah.
And Joe was a little earlier in February of
yeah.
40.
No,
Right.
I was shot down on the 10th of April of
10th of April.
45,
That's right.
Yeah.
and well, eventually ended up in Luckenwalde, Stalag 3, and escaped and got with the Russians, and I fought with the Russians until the end of the war.
So we're going to get into those stories here in a little bit. But Scott, you want to introduce the veterans that you were able to secure for us?
Absolutely. First, I'd like to introduce Frank Cohn. Frank, I'd love it if you could say hello to people and tell them where you're from, because it's a little surprising.
Well, the first thing is, it's not very often that I ended up being the youngest one in the group. I won't be 100 until August. So you two guys are certainly older than me, and I respect my elders.
Okay, great.
And Frank, tell everybody where you're from, because it might not be what they expect.
Well, I was actually born in Germany, and I escaped Nazi Germany in 1938 at age 13. So I know a little bit about Nazi Germany, and I certainly knew the language. And the language was which made me survive through World War II.
It's an absolutely fascinating story. And Frank's going to be back next week to talk more about the Holocaust aspect of things, escaping Nazi Germany, and then going back as a liberator, which is really an incredible full circle story, I think. I also noticed, Glenn, that Wing Yok Lai is in the room. I think he might be, Sean.
Wing, I can ask you to unmute if you're able to click that.
And Glenn, I just got a phone call from Hilbert Margol. Apparently he got an unexpected visitor, but he is going to join in a little bit later.
Great, great.
And I'm not sure if Wing is on as yet, but
Wing's I'm asking him to unmute, but we may have trouble with his mic.
Okay. All right,
Yeah,
so
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
that's okay. Glenn, why don't you go ahead and
Sure. So for our three veterans that are on right now, as you knew, as we informed you, we weren't looking to tell your whole story from when you joined the service to through your service and the end of the war. We wanted to focus on the end of the war and your experience at the end of the war and your thoughts and maybe your, I would say, analysis of what that all meant 80 years later now, from very young men at that time to now, let's say, mature men. So that's the direction we're going to go. And instead of asking you sort of one by one, it's almost if we were in a room with a panel and you were our panelists, okay? I know that's kind of difficult to do on Zoom, but let's give it the best we can, okay? So just the very beginning, the first question was, how did each of you come into the military? When did you come into the military? And how did you end up in the branch of service that you served in? So maybe we start with Frank. Frank, could you give us that background, please?
Okay. Well, I was 18 in August of 1943, and I was drafted in September. So it didn't take too long for me to get in. At first, well, I had a rough time getting in because at first they indicated I'm an enemy alien because I was born in Germany. They had to investigate me, and it took me 3 months in the reception center before they gave me clearance. And then I went to basic training, and in basic training, they took me out 3 weeks later to swear me in as a U.S. citizen. And I was sure proud because I got rid of that enemy alien business.
Frank, you were obviously fluent in German, your native language. How fluent were you in English at 18 years old?
Well, at first, they didn't seem to know that I spoke German. I was an infantry replacement. I went into the 87th Infantry Division in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and they kicked me out as an infantry replacement to go overseas to fill all the vacancies that were made on D-Day. And off I went through England and France and Belgium, and you would think they'd be in a hurry to get me in there, but they don't. They took their sweet time in the replacement depot. But when I got to Belgium, they suddenly found out I spoke German. And with that, they needed German linguists more than they needed the infantry. And off I went to Le Bessenay near Paris for a 2-week course. If you ever heard of the Ritchie boys, which were linguists, and they were trained at Camp Ritchie, Maryland, well, this was Ritchie Light. We had a 2-week course taken out of that 13-week course, and that made me a full-fledged intelligence agent wearing no rank, only US, and I outranked the driver who didn't know. And he outranked me, but he didn't know that, and I ordered him around all the time.
So Frank, obviously you speak English with absolutely no hint of any accent, German accent. At that time, when you were 19 years old, did you speak English with a German accent?
And no, that was the first thing that happened. As I learned English at age 13, I listened to the radio, and I never knew what was going on, but I heard the intonations, and I knew about that German accent, and I didn't want it. I wanted to get away from Germany in all aspects. So I trained with the sounds that I heard on the radio. But what really taught me English was the movies, because there you could see what was going on, and they were 10 cents, but we managed to scrape that together, and I saw a lot of movies, and they helped me get the English.
I knew you sounded a little bit like Clark Gable. That's where it comes from.
Oh, goodness.
Okay, thank you.
If I'd have looked like him, I could have been in the movies then.
Thank you, Frank. Let's ask George the same question. George, could you give us a little background as to when you joined the service and how you came to be in the U.S. Army Air Force?
Okay, you're speaking to a kid from Brooklyn, New York. And Brooklyn in 1943, out of high school, all of us either were going to be drafted or we had already enlisted. And so as I tell people, I got my diploma in one hand and my draft notice in the other, and went right into service. I was just turning 18 at the time, and went into service immediately, into basic training. Now, before in my early years, even in high school, I loved flying. I used to go to a local airport called Floyd Bennett Airfield. It's still there, and I used to love to watch the airplanes take off. It was something I always admired and loved. And so I asked to be into the Air Force as soon as I was in basic training, and they approved it, and I was sent to a cadet training school at High Point, North Carolina, where it was the college for Air Force cadets at that time. And I was there 4 or 5 months when we were told that we were going to be reclassified. It wasn't until much later I found out that they really had an oversurplus of men applying to be pilots, and they really needed other type of technicians to be flying on bomber crews. So I was sent back, reclassified as an armor gunner, sent out then to Colorado to learn armament school, and then to Harlingen, Texas to learn gunnery. And from there, I was put on a B-17 bomber crew the summer of 1943, late 1943. And from there on in, a lot of experience.
Yeah.
That's the beginning.
That's the beginning. Thank you for that. Thank you. And then Joe, your beginning of military service story, if you would, please.
Yeah. Well, I was studying to be a priest in the seminary when Pearl Harbor happened, but and at that time I knew that I'd get out because I came from a military family. My father and brothers were all in. So I left the seminary, and on my 18th birthday, I took the competitive exam for aviation cadet, Army Air Corps aviation cadet program, which I passed and eventually graduated as a single engine fighter pilot at 19 years old on the 15th of April of 1944. And after graduating, I did a tour with the replacement training, flying P-40s and A-24s. I got a couple of 100 hours of that, and then was shipped over to England and arrived in Scotland on about the 6th of November, and then proceeded down to King's Cliff, where the station was, an RAF station that the 20th Fighter Group was in, and I was assigned to the 20th Fighter Group, 55th Fighter Squadron, flying P-51s. I'd never seen a P-51. I checked out, and after about 20 hours of transition, we just read the manual and started flying. The P-40 to the 51 was no sweat. And mostly the 20 hours was accumulated by learning the tactics and that sort of stuff. And then I was combat ready, and I flew my first mission on the 12th of December of 1944, and flew 49 missions after that. And I'll save the rest for later.
The last one had a sudden stop to it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I had a sudden stop at 49.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for just laying the groundwork for us. Scott, has anybody else joined us that we should cover?
I think that Wing Yoklai is unmuted now. So, Wing, if you are there, would you be able to introduce yourself to the group? Tell us where you're from and how you came to be in the military.
Well, thank you for meeting with all of you, veterans. I made 100 last January, and to go forward, I got drafted when I was 18 years old, right after high school, and I'm glad I did. They drafted me, and I was happy about that, because at that time I never go any place or never travel any place, because we were stuck in San Francisco, Chinatown, and the family was poor, and we grew up in the decline part of the area. But anyway, got drafted, and I got sent to the CBI area. Got to India, trained there, traveled toward the Burma Road. Took us a lot of time there. It's a long story for that. And I became a staff sergeant as a mechanic, so-called mechanic. But I came back. I got in the service from 1943 to 1946. And I got home. Oh, during that time, my brother got killed in an airplane crash. My wife's brother also got killed over there in the CBI area. But for me, I was very lucky. I got back home in one piece, went to school on a GI Bill, bought a house with the California loan, and now I'm here and I'm very glad I am.
Well, thank you for being with us, and what a fascinating story. If I may ask, you're of Chinese ancestry. What generation Chinese?
I'm a third generation
Or
Chinese.
did you
I was a 14th Air Force, 555 Air Squadron.
Okay. Interesting. Did you speak Chinese?
Yes,
And
Chinese American, please.
yes, no, but I mean language. You were fluent in Chinese.
No,
Okay.
not quite.
Yeah. Given third generation,
Yeah,
by then you spoke San Franciscan.
yeah, San Franciscan Cantonese.
Yeah. There you Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's pause just for a moment. Scott, once we pause and ask if there's any questions from our audience, if you would take the next round of questions for the veterans, is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Other than-
So one of the other things, gentlemen, that Glenn and I were very curious about, and I think everybody would be curious about, is what your feelings were as the war was coming to an end, if it's something that you thought was on the way, and if that maybe changed your approach to the war at all. So maybe Frank, we could start with you on that one. I think Frank might need to be asked to unmute, Sean.
I also
Yes.
one question from Mary
Sure.
Klepper. If we could, I'll ask her to unmute and ask her to voice her question.
Sure. Oh no, my question was is it Mr. Wing? I lost the name on the thing there. My grandfather, he received his Congressional Gold Medal in 2021. Did you join in the service via Zoom, or did they come out and give you yours? I don't know if too many people know about that. Our Chinese Americans were finally honored with the Congressional Gold Medal because at the time they were fighting and the government still had a kibosh on Chinese citizens coming to the country. The only time we have ever prohibited a certain nationality from coming to this country. And so the Chinese Americans were finally honored for that in 2021. It was amazing service. So did you get a chance to watch it?
Yes, I got my gold medal, gold honor medal some time ago.
Yeah. I loved the very end where the last man that he said Geronimo at the end of the service that they had. It was really patriotic, very beautiful. So thank you for your service.
Oh, you're welcome.
Anything else from anybody in the audience? If not, we'll let Scott move forward.
Colin has a question, I believe. Let's see here. Go ahead, Colin, once I get you unmuted.
Yeah, I have a question for Frank Cohn. Are you there, Frank?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Der Ausgezeichneten, bitte für kommen hier dieser Abend, ja. I just wanted to ask you, did you ever have a chance to interrogate German prisoners?
Oh, absolutely. We had quite a number of them. There's one I particularly remember. We were in Frankfurt and we had a whole bunch of German prisoners, and we were asked to determine if any of them needed to be interrogated further, or if they were not going to have any intelligence value and could be placed in a POW camp. So I had a major general at detention in front of me, and I asked him what his name was, and he said, August Wilhelm von Hohenzollern. Well, from my German education, I knew this was the aristocracy, and this guy was Prince Auwi, the crown prince of the Kaiser. And I stopped the interrogation immediately, went back to my captain and told him, I got a big one. And that was the last I ever talked to Auwi ever again.
That's a good story.
I took him away.
Great story. Thank you, Colin. And
We have a question from Dave Seaver for Wing. How different was VE Day being? Oh, go ahead, Glenn.
yeah, could we hold? I saw that from David. Could we hold off on that one to just a little bit later? Because that's the last question we're going to ask everybody, is their experience on VE Day.
Sure.
I hope you don't mind, David. Scott, why don't you go ahead with that next round that we were asking?
Sure. So, Frank, just following up with what you were saying there before, at the very end of the war, what exactly were you spending your time doing in April? Was it these interrogations? Was that taking up most of your time?
Well, our mission was to go into the big cities with the infantry, and we had dossiers for building targets and personality targets. Building targets, anything that was needed by the forces after the war in the occupation, and anything that had to do with the government and the Nazi Party and the war criminals. And the personality targets were the war criminals. Well, we had gone through Cologne, Frankfurt, Wiesbaden, and we were to go to Kassel, and they said, forget Kassel, go immediately to Magdeburg, because the Russians are on the other side of the Elbe. Now, this is in late April now of 1945. So we proceeded on the Autobahn towards Magdeburg, and we knew the war was over for us. On both sides of the Autobahn, there were German soldiers coming towards us, trying to give themselves up because they were hungry and wanted to eat in a POW camp. Of course, we had to wave them off because we had another mission, but nobody was shooting us anymore, and we knew the war was over. So when we got to Magdeburg, the Russians indeed were on the other side of the war. Would you like me to tell you our meeting, or do that for later?
Up to you, Glenn. I think this is a good time to hear this story, and that
Sure.
might transition to Joe. So go ahead, Frank. This is a great story.
Well, my captain got a top secret map that showed the occupation zones, and where we were in Magdeburg, that was the Soviet zone, and the Soviet zone was going even further west all the way to Helmstedt. But he also got the word to go across and talk to the Russians to tell them, stay where you are for the next few weeks until we withdraw, and then you take over Magdeburg and the area further to the west. So he's looking for a Russian speaker, can't find one, turns to me and says, you're my interpreter, come with me. I'm trying to get out of it. I said, I know one word of Russian, Tovarish, that's it, friend. No, I can't help you. He said, I don't care, carry the map. So he gets a no boatman to take us across, and mid-river he gets up to make sure they understand it's an American coming across. Well, you can't imagine the reception we received when we got to the other side of the Elbe. They hugged us, they kissed us, they carried us around, they tried to ply us with vodka. I'm 19 years old, I've never had a slug of vodka in my life. And I knew, a little sip, I knew I better stay away from that stuff. If I had some cigarettes and I could reciprocate. Well, of course, I was of no use to the captain. They had to take him to the rear where they got an interpreter, I guess, while I stayed at the river edge at the Elbe talking to the Russian soldiers. One took shine to me. He said, me, Moscow. I said, me, New York. He said, you come Moscow. I said, me, you come. That's how we talked. Anyway, the captain came back and he was happy. And we talked to people when we got back, how nice reception we received. And it dawned on me a few weeks later as to why it was such a reception. When the Germans moved into Poland and Russia, attacking the Soviets, they mistreated them. So when the tide of war changed and the Russians started to come west, the German soldiers never wanted to be taken prisoner of the Russians, because the Russians were taking their revenge. So when they finally saw an American uniform, they knew there were no more Germans in front of them, and they had survived the war. They were celebrating their survival as well as their meeting with us.
Fascinating.
Now, when when the final day of the war came and they declared the war is over, it was all anticlimactic for us, and we hardly took notice. And the next day, they called us back to Wiesbaden and they dissolved our intelligence unit. We all got different orders, and we were sad because we were no longer going to be together.
Hmm. Thank you, Frank.
Yeah, that's just an amazing story, Frank. And I'd like to ask a similar question to Joe, if that's okay, Glenn, because Joe, you got an up-close look at the Russians from I think a bit of a different angle, Frank.
That's a little different story. First, I'd like to ask Joseph a question. Our bomber group, the 486 out of Sudbury, I wonder if your little friend were at one time with your P-51s supporting us on some of those bomber missions that we went out over Germany on. I have no idea if you have a list of any of the we were in 3rd Division of the 8th Air Force. And so we used to appreciate having the 47s and the 51s. They could go as far as they could with us into German territory. So, Joseph, I don't know if that was any one of your missions. So,
Well, yes, we did escort the 1st and 3rd divisions, and I'd say over half of my missions were escorting the bombers. And I
right,
do have a resume of every one of my missions, and I've done this several times. I've bomber pilots, crew members, and navigators. They'll give me a list of their missions, and then I compare them with my missions. And I think the highest there's one case where I escorted their group on 20 missions.
right,
And the 3rd of February mission, there's 2 navigators that were on that mission, as was I. That was the mission to Berlin. That was covered in the series about 8th Air Force. It was the last mission, 3rd of February, 1945 to Berlin. But it's very interesting. I enjoy doing that because it always makes both of us feel good to know that we were both up in the air at the same time doing the same mission.
right. Thank you. To answer your question, in a prison camp, we had very little communication. To us, we had a feeling, is all I can say. The war was really coming down. But you live in a prison camp day to day, so it wasn't something you thought about. When the end of April of 45, and the American forces, and especially now Patton's army, was getting close, they sent a delegation into our prison camp at Dachau, at Moosburg. We were near Dachau. At Moosburg, which had more than 80,000 prisoners, a brilliant idea Hitler had of moving all the prisoners of war into Bavaria and for execution if he didn't get any changes on conditions of surrender of Germany. It was a stupid idea, but our camp was really overflowing with men from Canada, from Poland, from you name the country who were prisoners. And so these last days, the American Army sent under a white flag into our camp at Moosburg to discuss negotiations on the camp being handed over to American forces. Unfortunately, the Germans had sent in an SS group that said, "No, we're going to fight for Moosburg. We're not going to allow the Americans in." So our commander, General Good, who was the Allied commander in our camp, said, "Look, fellas, it looks like going to be a battle. My suggestion to all of you is dig a foxhole. There's nothing we can do about it, and get into the ground." And so this is what we did. And fortunately, I wound up with 2 Canadian soldiers who had been seminarians before the war. And so they gave me beads, and to this day I know my Hail Marys perfect. And for hours, for more than 3 or 4 hours, there was a horrible battle. 10 POWs were killed during this stupidity until, of course, the Germans gave up and the infantry came into the camp. So this was as close as we got to knowing the war was over, for us at least. And you talk about the Russians. There was a Russian prison camp right next door to us. And when liberation came, they went into Moosburg and really ripped it apart. I mean, their feelings about the Germans, I can't tell you. One small story, we used to barter things over the fence with them. They would make little metal spoons and things, and we throw them stuff from our Red Cross packages that we lived on, a little uh, chocolate or some cheese or something. And one day we're doing this, and the German soldier comes right over to the Russian who was doing it to us, takes out his rifle and kills him right in front of us. No questions asked, and we were told just get back from the wire. And we watched this happen directly, and I can see how the Russians felt about the Germans. And of course, they never signed the Geneva Convention, so they didn't supposedly have the protection that we had as prisoners of war. It was a horrible time. So the end of the war, we really didn't think about it. It was just survival, survival.
And Glenn, before we go on to Joe to hear his story, I noticed that Hilbert just came into the room. So Hilbert, I'd love it if you could say hello to the group. It's nice to see you again.
Well, I'm sorry I'm running late, but I'm here.
Well, that's okay. Better late than never, Hilbert. Hilbert, I'd love it if you could tell everybody where you're from and what brought you into the military in World War II.
Well, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and born and raised in Jacksonville, Florida. And I had an identical twin brother. Two of us who graduated high school January 1942. And anyhow, we ended up going to Munich in combat. And we were about 9-10 miles north of Munich when everybody smelled a very, very strong odor. And one of our Jeep drivers came by and said, there must be a chemical factory in the woods on the left side of the road because that's resulting this very strong odor. My brother Howard came over to me and said, you don't think it's a chemical factory? The odor reminds him of when we were kids and our mother would go to a meat market, buy a freshly killed chicken, take it home, hold the chicken over the gas flame stove in the kitchen, burn off any remaining pin feathers. In so doing, it would burn some of the skin and the fat of the chicken. So I asked my gun sergeant, Tom Rogers, permission for Howard and I could go and determine the source of this odor. He could have said no, but he said, well, go ahead, but don't stay long because we may be pulling out any minute towards Munich. This was early Sunday morning, April 29th, 1945. So went through the woods. First thing we saw was a line of railroad boxcars. We crawled over between two boxcars, and the first boxcar on our right, the door was open and filled with dead prisoners, and one of them had both legs hanging out of the boxcar. We looked down the row, and other boxcars, the doors were open, but this was the only one that had a prisoner actually with his legs hanging out. So we stopped, we took a picture of it, and then we saw few other soldiers there going at a gate. Famous German words, Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free. Two-story building. So we just followed them in through that gate. And what we saw was dead bodies stacked like cordwood, a few places here, a couple places over there, but they were all nude, no clothes. We couldn't understand what we were seeing. We didn't know the details. It was set up more like a Hollywood movie set, getting ready to take a movie. So we saw the barracks, we saw some other buildings, and then we had to leave to go back to our gun crew. So we later learned that the reason why the dead bodies were stacked like cordwood, completely nude, months earlier, the Germans had run out of coal, couldn't operate the ovens. And that's why those bodies were there, because the actual crematorium was not in the prisoner camp. It was in the huge German Army SS training camp next door. And that's where it was. And we went back there, 70th anniversary of the liberation, and we saw what was left there. And right now, I'm planning on going to Normandy, France, 30th of this month. Delta Airlines charter flight. Went last year and it was a fantastic trip. 2 weeks after I get back from that, I'm going to fly to Germany because I've been invited for a group that chartered a whole riverboat. But they're going to spend 2 days in Munich sightseeing first. Then they're going to Dachau before we get on the boat. So that's why they invited me and my son to go with me. All expenses paid, first class, everything. So I can't complain.
Gilbert, this is Glenn from the Veterans Breakfast Club. Two things. You need someone to carry your suitcase, I'm available. Just let me know what date to be there. Seriously, what military unit were you with when you were liberating?
42nd Infantry Division.
42nd Infantry Division.
Which was sort of famous in World War I.
Yeah.
They never let us forget that.
Rainbow Division, right? Was that the?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
When we used to see the American planes flying back from Germany to England, we would stand and salute them. They couldn't, the pilots couldn't see us, but it made us feel good.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And if we maybe Scott, we ought to move on to the other couple of veterans for this question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So maybe, Glenn, this would be a good time to hear Joe tell a little bit about his experiences, right, at, I guess, the month of April 1945, Joe.
Okay, it was the 10th of April of 1945, and 8th Air Force was going to demonstrate its air supremacy, and we launched some 1,800 bombers and some 900 plus fighters, escorting them to various targets in Germany. We rendezvoused with the bombers, and at Magdeburg, the various groups went off to their targets. The one I was escorting was some 400 bombers going to Oranienburg. And we got to Oranienburg, and they dropped their bombs, and we were hit by a swarm of ME-262 turbojets. I latched onto one with my eyeballs and saw them blow up one B-17. And I was flying high cover, so I could pick up speed to take care of the difference between the 100-knot advantage the 262 had. And anyway, I was able to shoot him down just after he shot down his second that I saw, but his fourth in that mission, I found out later, he had shot down 4 B-17s. And I got him in the left wing, and he went down. His aircraft was still flying, and he disappeared into the clouds. And I didn't follow him in there, but he is burning. And I find out later that his engine disintegrated, and he bailed out. The pilot was Oberleutnant Walter Schuck, and he had 206 confirmed aerial victories, 198 in the ME-109, and the 8 of them in the 262. Anyway, after he went into the clouds, I saw an airfield full of aircraft that I decided to start shrimping it. I made too many passes and I got severely damaged. I was able to make it back to Magdeburg. I bailed out at Magdeburg and became a POW in the Magdeburg area, and then went on a forced march back to Berlin, to Luckenwalde near Berlin, Stalag 3. It was put into a Russian prisoner, all Russian prisoner of war camp, and I was able to escape within about 10 days and joined a Russian tank unit coming out of Berlin. I fought with them through Jüterbog, and their target was Wittenberg on the Elbe, and so I stayed with them on the trek to Wittenberg. And near a couple of days before we got to Wittenberg, they had they built a big banquet table, could hold about. We were at a farm area, killed a bunch of animals, and we had a big feast going on. And every other toast was to me, the American, and I got stinking drunk and drinking their vodka. And I never realized it until recently. I thought, well, I wonder. And then I started thinking that must have been VE Day, because they were doing a big celebration of VE Day. And I didn't know about, I couldn't communicate that well with them. And they were just interested in toasting something or other. And I didn't know what it was they were toasting. But anyway, I was shortly, after we got to Wittenberg, I was recovered by American troops who had come across the Elbe and eventually made it home. But that was my experience in D-Day. I really didn't know what was going on.
Was that your last experience with vodka, Joe?
Oh, no.
Okay. No more story.
Some years ago, I enjoyed a vodka martini, but not anymore.
And before we get to George next, Scott, if you don't mind me interfering here, I know it's a long story. If we can compress it into a shorter story, that pilot you shot down what was his name again?
Oberleutnant Walter Schuck.
Schuck. Yeah. You got to know him.
Yeah,
in
some 60 years later. After a lot of everybody, of course, he was a top German ace, and all the researchers in Europe were trying to find out, and they went on and on. And then my aircraft was recovered in about 1996, and then they started looking for the pilot of that aircraft, and they found me. I was the pilot, and then they started putting Walter's story together and my story together. They said, well, definitely you're the one that shot him down, primarily because Walter was the only one that shot down two. Actually, he did four, but I saw two of them on that mission, and he was the only one that did it, so it had to be me. So it was confirmed that I was the one that shot him down, and he was visiting a old buddy of his from his time up in the North Sea, at Petsamo in Finland, and they've invited me down to meet him at the Old Bold Pilots meeting in Vista, California. He and I met for the first time personally. The second time, yeah, the first in the air, and we became close friends immediately, and spent the next till 2015, the next 12 years doing shows together, and he became part of our family. I'm Papa Joe to my great granddaughters and the family, and he's Papa Walter. And he was a great gentleman, and we really enjoyed each other's company. He passed in 2015. He was 4 years older than I.
I think that's one of the great human interest stories of World War II. That's just incredible. So,
and if I could interject, Ulrika, Walter's daughter, is also still friends with Walter. I mean, with Joe and myself. And Walter told me, because I knew Walter years before I met Joe, that Walter credited Joe with saving his life because Walter broke both of his ankles when he bailed out. He probably would not have survived the war if he had gone back in the air.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It always introduced me when we were at a show or something. Right? He said, "This is Joey." He called me Joey. He said, "This is Joey, and he saved my life
by shooting me down." Okay, Scott, who do we want to move on to next, Scott? These stories are just so good.
I know, and I'm keeping an eye on the time, and it's just incredible listening to this. I wanted to ask a quick question to Frank, if I could, following what Hilbert said a couple of moments ago. Frank, had you heard any rumors about these camps or anything in the month of April? Did you have a sense of what was going on with respect to the Holocaust?
Not really. I never got into one of those camps during the war or even in the occupation. We had all the stories, of course, but you never really got the full impact of this until you went into one of those camps to take a look and you saw the gas chambers and the crematoria, and it's just horrible when you go in there. Now, my family, we lost 11 close relatives in the Holocaust, in the camps. They died in the camps. But we didn't know that until the war was over, of course. I know I was trying to find my aunt in Berlin, and I had a chance in the occupation to get to Berlin to see if it could trace her. And I went to the Red Cross, and they had very good lists. They had lists that she was first placed into Theresienstadt, and then, which was that camp that they showed the Red Cross. And then from Theresienstadt, she was transferred to Auschwitz, and there was no listing of her coming alive out of Auschwitz. So we knew that she died in Auschwitz. That's how we found out about this one relative.
What if we move? Who would you like to move to next, Scott? I think George still. We haven't covered George for a bit.
Yeah. How about George? I guess obviously from the standpoint of a POW, how did you become aware, or did you get a sense of the arrival of the Americans and so on? How did you know that the war was just about at an end?
Well, it was mostly word of mouth. We had no idea. In other words, living in a prison camp, you don't have it's as I said earlier, day-to-day things. I used to make a great dandelion soup, and we had clim, the silk, the milk, what we'd make, and it was just staying alive. Boredom. The camp was so filled with men, some sick, some needed help. I had been shot up in one leg, and so it was just really not knowing your relationship to the war or the Holocaust or any of this. It was just how did we survive each day? So really didn't think about it until we found out through the chain of command that the Americans were coming and we were going to be liberated. And I'm curious if Hilbert's division regiment was one of those, because Dachau was just a few miles from where we were. Whether they liberated our camp at Moosburg, I don't know. Whether his regiment was the ones that liberated, I have no idea. But I know they went on to Dachau when they also liberated our camp. So I have no idea who the men were.
Hilbert, let me repeat that for you. Were you aware of the American and the Allied prisoner of war camps near you, the one at Mooseburg?
No,
Not
No.
really. Petersburg was a weird camp. Yeah,
No. I'm asking Hilbert, George.
yeah. I don't have. Oh, I'm sorry.
we
Uh,
it
I
was
know,
very,
Hilbert. Did your regiment liberate a POW camp?
no, there were some other units nearby that did so,
Okay.
but it was early Sunday morning, April 29th, when we entered the Dachau concentration camp.
Right.
We didn't know at the time, but the day before, arrangements had been made for the camp to be surrendered, peacefully surrendered. We were there early that Sunday morning. The official surrender took place about 2:30 that afternoon. And that's all we knew at the time. What we learned was after the war ended, then we learned there was 32,000 prisoners in the barracks. We didn't see any of them. A high percentage of them were very ill with typhus. The Germans had nothing to kill the lice which created the typhus. And when our units came in, they had DDT powder, which has since been outlawed, but that was used to kill the lice. It still took them close to 30 days to eradicate all the typhus. And that was pretty much it.
Wow. I think we have a question for Wynn in the chat, Scott. I know his experience, obviously, he's on the other side of the world on VE Day.
I think that Wing might have left. Actually, he's on the West Coast, so I think he might have adjudicated to or adjourned to dinner. Yeah, so we might. So we're missing him, but it would be great to get him back for a future show dealing with the Pacific War.
Yeah, the thought was we'd do eventually a VJ Day, so we'll bring him back for that. The question was, what was it like on the other side of the world when you heard about VE Day? And having asked that question to quite a few Pacific War veterans, the answer seemed to be, "That's nice, but I'm still here." So, yeah,
That's pretty much it.
yeah. Perhaps it's 8:07. Do we want to take, Sean, a brief break?
Sure, we could take a very brief station break here. I'll pull up my screen. I just want to thank you all again for joining us this evening. It's an honor to have so many World War II veterans joining us, and just want to thank Scott again for networking for us and bringing on these great guys. I also want to thank UPMC for Life for sponsoring tonight. They have plans created by veterans for veterans. Check them out at upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. They've been a great sponsor for quite a while for us, and just continued support for VBC and this programming. We appreciate it. We have a survey that we usually put a little link into the chat just to hear y'all's thoughts on tonight's program. I can't imagine you'd have anything negative to say, but also we have a magazine. This is a free quarterly magazine. As you can see, we are honoring the fall of Saigon. This is the 50th anniversary this year. Also, a part of that magazine will be an article about the fall of Kabul. It can go out to your mailbox for free, like I said, but if you don't get it, it's just because we don't have your address. So please send your address to us, and we'll be happy to put the magazine in the mail to you and get you on our mailing list so that you can get these magazines in the future. And we have a couple of programs coming up here in the next couple of weeks. We have Korean War Veteran 20 coming on Monday, May 12th. Please join us Monday night, 7 p.m., same Zoom channel to hear his story. And next Thursday, Glenn, we have the liberation of concentration camps, 1945, correct?
Correct, and that is another Scott Masters masterpiece, if you don't mind the pun, Scott. Scott has arranged all the guests, and he's going to be the host, and I'm going to be riding side saddle for that one.
I like that, Glenn. The Scott Masters masterpiece. We're gonna coin that. So I should be on with you guys next week for that.
Yeah. Remember the old masterpiece hour? I think we got to go back to that.
There you go. And then the following Monday, Voices from Vietnam with Doc Norton and Harry Kantrovich. We're looking forward to having them come on and join us to discuss their stories. Continuing stories all year long. We're not even halfway through this year yet, but we're excited to continue to bring stories to you. And we invite you to come on to our website, veteransbreakfastclub.org. Check out our website if you're new to us. Find out about our mission, all of our upcoming programming, all of our upcoming in-person programming. If you've not joined us for a breakfast, they are our bread and butter here in Western PA. Worth a visit to Pittsburgh. If you've not been here, we'd love to have you come and join and tell us your story. Always a pleasure, and we invite you to become donors of the VBC just to help us, as we say in the nonprofit world, keep the lights on. So thank you so much, guys. Back to you.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks very much. Maybe we'll add a pause and see if there's questions from the audience before Scott and I continue. If anybody would like to ask these fine gentlemen, you don't get too many chances to ask veterans of World War II questions.
Right.
Anything in the chat, or would anybody like to put their hand up? I see
I have
one.
a question. Yeah, Hilbert. Hello, Joe. Love you, guy. Been a long time. Hilbert, one question I have. I interviewed over 30 SS veterans, 12 generals, several officers. 4 of them were sentenced to prison terms at the Nuremberg trials because of being guards at several camps, one including Dachau, Herbert Mollier. My question is, did you witness any of the retaliation from the inmates against any of the guards that we know occurred, but I was just curious if you ever witnessed any of it yourself?
No, but I, learned quite a bit since I got out of the Army, and many years ago, 1946. And I've read stories saying where some of the prisoners killed some German soldiers the day of liberation. Totally untrue, because there were no German soldiers in the prisoner camp.
Yeah.
Next to the prisoner camp was an extremely large German army camp and SS training camp. Mm-hmm. And the SS officer in charge, he had left with all the SS officers except one junior lieutenant who gave the surrender. Mm-hmm. And he took all but about 50 or 60 of young German soldiers of Wehrmacht. And the rest of them all took off. What happened was, from what I understand, and I believe it, didn't see it, but I believe it, because when we were there early that Sunday morning, all the prisoners were in the barracks, over 32,000. They were told the night before the camp was going to be peacefully surrendered, so just stay in the barracks. Well, the Germans had appointed a leader of every barracks, a prisoner to be the leader.
Yeah.
And those were the ones that some of them got killed by prisoners. When our first guys showed up, they took their rifles and they killed I'm trying to think of the name they called them.
The capos.
The capos.
Yeah.
And those were the ones, because the capos mistreated the prisoners more than the German soldiers did. It was their way of showing the German soldiers that they were helping them, and which led to better food, better treatment. And that's why some of the prisoners killed some of the capos who were actually prisoners. And that was the story there. I didn't see any of it because I say we were early Sunday morning, April 29th, when we were there. Wasn't that many of us, maybe, I don't know, 50, 60 soldiers altogether, 222nd Infantry Regiment from the 42nd Division, because that's who my gun crew was in direct support of. And that was pretty much it. But every year after the war, my division had a reunion somewhere some city in the United States, different city every year. And that gave me the opportunity to talk to some of the infantry guys who were there also. And that's some of what I learned too. That was pretty much it.
Well, thank you very much. My step-grandfather was in the 42nd Division, and he was there at Dachau as well on occupation duty in Austria. So I wasn't sure if you knew him. He was John Hill from South Carolina.
Yeah. No.
Thank you.
Each division had 15,000 men in it. So,
Yeah.
division. So I only knew 100 men during the combat, 100 men in my gun battery. And that was it.
Thank you. Let's try to get a few more questions in. I see Justin Miller. Justin?
Yes. My question for Frank, after reading an awful lot about the groups in Europe during pre-war that were getting people out of Europe to either England or the United States, how did you get out of Germany? If I've got the right person.
Yep.
Well, in 1938, my father had just run out of being able to earn a living in Germany. And he had some distant relatives in the States. And he said to me he was going to see if he could get an affidavit from these distant relatives. And he took off on a visitor's visa. And when he got to the States, he did find the relatives, but because of the Depression, they couldn't give him an affidavit because the affidavit has a proviso that the people who are invited to immigrate cannot become a burden to the government. So you have to have enough money to support the people that you are sponsoring. So he had to stay longer to find somebody to give him an affidavit. And when he stayed longer, Gestapo came to our door looking for him. And my mother said that my father was on a international business trip, and she was instructed to have him report to Gestapo headquarters the minute he came back. And after that visit, we got another visit of a British lady a few days later with an official document that stated we had to give her an apartment, a bedroom in our apartment. And my mother took me aside and said, this is a Gestapo agent, and if we have anything to say, we have to go outside. And a few days later, she said, let's go for a walk. And I knew this was important. She said, should we go? And I knew what she meant, that we had to flee from Germany. And I had lots of friends there. I was on the soccer team. I had a good school, a Jewish private school that I liked, and everything. And my relatives were there. Anything that could hold me, but I knew better. The smartest thing I ever did in my life, I said to her, let's go. Because had I not wanted to go, I could have delayed the whole situation. And in retrospect, that could have killed us because we escaped on visitor's visa. My mother got them from the American consulate. They didn't have computers and didn't realize my father was already in country because as a refugee, she wouldn't have gotten the visa. But as a visitor, she could. And we went out as visitors, where that meant we could only take out one suitcase and 10 marks each, left everything behind. And when we got to the States, it was the 30th of November, 1943. On the 9th of December 43 was Crystal Night. So 10 days later was Crystal Night, the pogrom against the Jews. We missed it. And not only that, it saved us because President Roosevelt issued an executive order that said nobody would be forced to return to Germany if they are in country. And our visas were extended indefinitely, and we were saved.
What transportation did you go on? How did you physically move from Germany to the U.S.? By boat?
Well, we went what we could do before we left Germany. You could spend all kinds of money to make arrangements. And my mother made an arrangement for first-class passage on a Holland America line and first-class hotel reservations for 2 weeks in New York. And I had a wonderful trip to the States. I lived it up, almost became ping pong champion, but somebody beat me in it. But my mother had a miserable trip because she had heard about the interrogation on Ellis Island. And when we arrived at the harbor of New York, there was an announcement that came over the speaker system that said, all first-class passengers are invited to go through customs and directly onto the dock. Everybody else had to go to Ellis Island. And oh boy, was my mother happy.
Well, that's considered a really great first-year cruise.
She avoided Ellis Island.
Thank you. I heard from several people I know whose relatives came over either from Czechoslovakia, Poland, or Germany, mostly through Britain, on a whole lot of different issues, and they escaped. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Frank. That's a fascinating story. You're one very fortunate man and very fortunate family for that razor-thin escape.
Pure luck, yes.
Greg Yost, I know you've had your hand up a while.
Yes, thank you all so much for these stories. This is absolutely terrific. And Glenn, thanks for organizing it on this night, of course, VE Day or however well defined. Thanks so much. I'm going to bring up a really technical question that's a technical issue that's sort of a Paul Harvey rest of the story that probably has nothing to do with the stories. But the German surrender was actually, according to international law, a surrender of the military forces. It was not a capitulation of the nation state of Germany, which allowed for the post-war, same was true with Japan, which allowed for the post-war trials in the occupation. They didn't want Germany to say, oh, that was a new Germany to come along later and say, oh, that was someone else. We didn't do any of that stuff. So only the German military surrendered, which is sort of an interesting little side point of technical international law. My question for the people here is about the phase immediately after, the week or 2 or 3 after VE Day, the month of May. I had a great uncle who was drafted when he was in his early 30s, and he was basically drafted because he was conversationally fluent in German. And he was driving generals around 9th Army headquarters for a while. And then when they got to Germany, they sent him in a cavalry troop and a recon unit ahead of the forces, which Uncle Art trying to look for trouble is another story. But he was shot through the leg outside of Mannheim, I think, and recovered enough. He said the scariest day of the war was May 9th, when the colonel or major or someone knew that he was fluent in German and gave him this stack of papers to take to a German town that was about 8 miles down the street and order these people. This is a surrender. This is what's going to happen. We're the new boss. This is what the rules that you have to apply. He just assumed that there was going to be a convoy of 3 or 4 Jeeps armed and everything. It was just him driving down the road for 8 miles. He said that was the scariest day of the war. That if someone didn't get the message, that there would be these people sort of in the hills who would see this USGI on a Jeep and just shoot them and kill them, and no one would ever know. So how did the things go right after the end of the war? Were you confident that people knew that the war had ended, that there were maybe pockets of Germans in the hills who were sort of just looking for GIs to shoot? How did that phase, say the 3-4 days right after the end of the war, how did you guys deal with that?
Let me ask Hilbert, do you have any reflections on that question? The few weeks after the VE Day, what it felt like, what it looked like?
Well, we knew shortly after leaving Dachau, going to Munich, there was no much in the way of combat in Munich. it was all over. The war wasn't declared over, but at that point, May 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 3 straight days, we had 3 days of snow. I remember that very vividly since coming from Jacksonville, Florida, I never had seen snow before. So we knew the war was over because the combat was practically zil. It was just a jam-packed trucks, jeeps, tanks, trying to drive on the road. And one thing of incidents, when we would go through a small German village, the civilians would be on both sides of the road. And I could speak German very well at the time. And almost like a chorus that was trained, they all were saying in German, "The war will not be over until you defeat the Russians." They were scared to death of the Russians. They welcomed certainly the 42nd Division like conquering heroes. And that was the difference there. I remember that very well. So D-Day, I mean, not D-Day, but VE Day to us was really nothing special because we knew the war was already over anyway, days earlier.
Yeah. Frank, any comment?
Yeah, well, I have to go along with what he just said because the Germans were trying to bring up a rumor that we were going to march against the Russians. And of course, there was no idea about going against the Russians. They were our allies, as a matter of fact. So this was all wrong. And on the intelligence side, we didn't even take a look at that. We just pushed it aside and recognized it was just a rumor mongering of a hope that this would happen. And it was completely apart from reality. And I had no indication of any German attacks against Americans. Now, there might have been individual incidents, I suppose, but there was no organized arrangements to fight the Americans after the war was over.
A comment from David Hogan last week. David, we had on. David is just the recently retired director of the U.S. Army Military Center for History Studies. I may not have that name exactly right, but he's a walking encyclopedia on World War II. And we talked about this, and the point he made was that at the end of the war, the German nation, the people, the armies, were just exhausted. There was no gas left in the tank for any of them. Because I asked him, why weren't there, sort of guerrilla warfare, by these fanatic SS units? And he said even they were just exhausted. Unlike World War I, where we just sort of said one day, November 11th of 2018, there's an armistice, but the military and the country was still intact. At the end of World War II, as you men can attest, I hope, the place was devastated and the people were starving. So there seemed to be no interest in any retaliation. Does that echo correctly to you men who were there on the ground? Joe or George?
Well, from a different perspective to what you guys are talking about, you got to remember we prisoners of war, when we were liberated, most of us were pretty weak and sick and what have you, and needed food and care, and were sent to a camp. The camps were in France and named after cigarettes. I wound up at Camp Lucky Strike, you probably guys have heard of it, end of World War II. But the thing that got me is when we were shot down, by both a train, regular trains with people going from town to town. We got to remember we were shut down in a little town called Sonthofen, which, if you look on the map, is just below Munich. And we had to go back all the way to Frankfurt to Oberursel, which was the interrogation center. And we went by civilian train with 5 guards, a little sergeant who would give us a knock if we were out of line. And when you went through Regensburg and we went through Nuremberg, what did I see? Children and women lined up at getting their water for the day. They were allowed 2 pails of water, one for drinking and one for cooking, and that's all. And you would see people with little suitcases. And why did they have suitcases? And we found out later their city was bombed and they're looking for another city. They were like migrants going from city to city just to survive. So from our perspective, we saw no men. This was just women. If there were any men, they were old men. Matter of fact, one of the guards I had been a delicatessen owner in the States before the war started. And of course, they put him in. And when we went on a long march from Nuremberg to Munich, which is another story, I used to hold his gun. He couldn't hold his gun. He was exhausted. And this was a German soldier. But when you looked at the country and the people, it was very, very devastated from our prisoners' point of view.
Thank you, George.
Hey, George, I was at Camp Lucky Strike too. Coincidence?
Yeah. The two of you probably smoked a Lucky Strike together.
Yeah.
I see a couple more hands up. Let's see here. Rich, are you unmuted? I'm having trouble with my pointer here.
Yeah, I have it.
There you
Yeah. Some of you know that I'm a clinical psychologist. I mean, I served in the military. I focus on the trauma, which I find for combatants to be profound. So if briefly, the guests that I respect dearly, if you could tell us just a little bit about your trauma and what you do that helps to relieve it to whatever degree you can. And thank you. You're part of the greatest generation. Thank you so much for your commitment. So that's to any of our guests.
George, if I could ask you,
can I make a comment to Paul's thing? I came back from the war, World War II. Most of us came back. This is a great war. Forget about it. Go back to school. Go back, get a job. Forget the war. I had no idea how bad my PTSD was at the time.
Okay.
I didn't even know that term existed. And as the years went on, I began to struggle more and more. My wife was the one who said to me, George, go down to the VA. You are in bad shape. And so when I wound up, the first thing they said to me, and I've heard this from other friends, where the hell have you guys been? All of you came home devastated by what you saw I did in that war and did nothing about it. You were told to forget it. To this very day, I meet every Friday with a group of veterans, with a psychologist. I'm the old timer. Most of them are Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And you hear the stories these guys have gone through, as I've went through, and you see what we do to our young men when we send them off to war. We forget about it. And your life is never the same.
Thank you.
Okay, it is 8:35. Scott, we haven't heard from you in a bit. We need to wind it up, but is there anything you'd like to finish with?
I just put a photo up in the chat for everybody to see. I thought it might be interesting for all of you to be able to see what these wonderful gentlemen looked like 80 years ago. They still
Good.
look like wonderful gentlemen here today in the year 2025. You know,
Yeah.
whether they're 99, 100, or 101, this has been fantastic. I did want to let people know that Hilbert and Frank are going to be joining us again next week when we focus more specifically on the Holocaust and the liberation of the camps, and you'll get to hear some of their stories in greater depth at that time.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Well, we need to wind up, and I want to personally thank each one of our 4 guests from the bottom of my heart: Joe, George, Frank, Hilbert, and Wynn, who had to drop off. We deeply appreciate what you've done for us, for our country. Deep respect. We're honored to be able to talk to you. And we hope that we keep in touch with you all and wish you the best. Thank you very, very much. Sean, anything else?
No, but that's great. I want to echo your sentiments. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to our World War II veterans for joining us this evening. We'll see you all on Monday night, and looking forward to it. Have a great weekend.
Thank you all.